welcome to Badaboom. I'm Chris. On this episode of the podcast, we have on Bryan Edward Hill, writer of Marvel's Blade. Hill, a writer, director, producer, and an overall cool dude, discusses with us how he captures the essence of what makes Blade a badass in the Marvel comic book series. Hill also shares on how he balances his career in TV and film and writing comic books. He also discusses what's to come in the series and why he continues to come back to comic books. The readers. Listen in and bada boom. Good morning, Bryan. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. Good morning, Night City.
That's great. Funny enough, I brought up my son earlier. I downloaded Cyberpunk because I was like, 2.0 and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have some fun, and because he loves Spider-Man. He's a 4-year-old, but he's like a moth to a flame when that PS5 sound turns on.
Sure.
So I was like, let me get something for myself, play it. I'm playing it, and then he comes over and he noticed that you could drive cars in it, and there's also elevators in it, which he's really passionate about. And he's like, "Hey, Dad, what's that controller right there? Why don't I play Cyberpunk?" I'm like,
"Oh,
okay.
Dear."
He's like, "Well, okay, I have to delete this game now." But yes,
Yeah. He's too young. That's going to traumatize him. I mean, when I was like 11 or something, I saw RoboCop, and I think it just radically affected me the rest of my life. So, maybe give him a little time before he plays Cyberpunk.
Yeah, in a couple of years. And if he plays Cyberpunk, maybe one day he'll be able to, write Blade. I think that's the path, just right.
I think that's how that works. All you need is, you just need a little pop cultural trauma, and then you're well on your way. You're well on your way.
Exactly.
Caterpillars turning into butterflies.
But thank you for coming on. We're excited to talk to you about Blade, about your career. So in particular with Blade, what was it like to sort of get that pitch to come on to the series? It is a fun time to be on the character, I think, because obviously he's going to be highlighted in the movies again. So what's it been like to kind of be in a position to spearhead that character? Because I think he's been around the last couple of years. They've tried to put him in the Avengers and stuff like that. But what I love about your series is that it feels like Blade, like the Wesley Blade. It's like, hey, he's a badass. It's centered on him. His daughter's not in it. So you're just like, this is like a Blade series. So what was it like to get pitched on it, and how did you approach that?
Well, I'm terribly busy, so I don't really have a ton of time to do a lot of things, because between the screenwriting and then the TV development I'm doing, and then I'm also director, and I'm producing the things like to direct. I don't have a lot of time, but I do have some friends that are editors, and they'll reach out to me every now and then and say, "Hey, we're doing this thing. Are you interested in doing it?" And I'll be honest, usually I say no. Usually I will say no, because I just don't have the bandwidth for it. But in this case, it was Will Moss over at Marvel, whom I'm a big fan of. I've done some work with him before. And Michelle Marchese, who I didn't know, but I heard lovely things about. And then Blade was, a character that I just never really considered writing. I was a big fan of the character, but I don't walk around thinking like, oh, well, I really wish I had this or had that, or was working this character or that character, because you can't really determine any of those things. I just think it's a bit of a folly to run around dreaming of stories of characters that you may never get to work on. But when I saw the opportunity was Blade, I thought, well, that's an interesting thing, and I'm an interesting fit for that, I think, because I'm both interested in character-driven stuff, but I'm also interested in highly adrenalized, high octane kind of genre storytelling. So I just said, okay, well, let me think about it. And then I came back with an idea. Well, this is really what I would do. And I outlined some of the things you were talking about. They're like, look, I want to do a globe-trotting action adventure that has that same kind of relentless feeling of the first movie, at least. I want to bring in elements of true horror, and all kinds of horror, from like Cronenbergian body horror to more Byzantine Gothic sort of horror, right? and I didn't want to immediately engage the daughter. Those are my kind of my signposts. And Marvel was amenable to all that, and so then I jumped in.
That's awesome. And what I love about that first issue of the series is that I feel like you were able to kind of do your own version of the blood rave from the first film, where you kind of have this thing where it's a party and Blade just comes in and it's just like crashing through with with his car.
It's a bit of a double homage, right? So there's the obvious parallels in that first scene to to the Stephen Norrington film, the Tracy Lords of it all, and the whole thing, right? I mean, Blade coming into a place where people are dancing and killing everything, right? So that's obvious, but it's also a nod to the Terminator, which is one of my favorite movies. And so I was thinking about, I was like thinking about the Terminator, thinking about Sarah Connor in the Tech Noir Club when the Terminator shows up, sort of this young woman sitting alone, in this place where everyone's dancing, but they're all oblivious to her, with the 80s kind of thing happening around her. So it's really a combination of those two things that put that scene in my head. And it just felt like a good visceral way to start the Blade experience. I like to let readers know from the beginning what the tone and tenor of what I'm going to do is. So it needs to have the right markers of aesthetic style. It needs to engage, I think, some of the physical conflict of the book, how I'm going to approach that. It needs to have like the mood, the tone. I think it's really important. So when they pick up a book and they sort of do that flip through, they'll get a sense of like, oh, okay, that's what this book is going to feel like. So yeah, so I just went ahead and said it there.
Now that you make that connection, it makes so much sense. I'm like, oh wow, even like sort of the framing that in the scenes, you're like, oh, like now that you said that, I'm like, oh yes, Terminator, obviously. And sort of talking with Marvel, like you're obviously going really deep into certain things. In the fourth issue, you have Doctor Strange. What was it like, sort of collaborating with them to see like what you can and can't do with a character that obviously has like movie ambitions? I'm sure there's some level of like, okay, these are the tools you could play with, these are not. So, what was that collaboration like?
Well, when it comes to the film, because I get asked about the film a lot, I'm pretty inoculated from whatever they're doing. Like, no one from the film side has approached me with rules, and I haven't gotten anything handed down that feel like, because I'm also a professional screenwriter,
Yeah.
so I'd be able to smell that one.
Yeah.
Like I would smell that one coming if I was getting those kind of notes, because oftentimes I'm the other guy, right? I'm the guy that's working on the film adaptation while someone else is writing the comic book. But I haven't really felt anything from Marvel that has been dictated by what they're doing with the movie. And then when it comes to other characters, I never go in with an idea of, well, I want to use these characters too, and I want to do a cameo here, and I want to bring this character in there. No, but Blade lives on the occult side of the Marvel universe. He is not a spellcaster, but he certainly lives on that side of the affair. And it just seemed natural at one point, if we're going to have something affecting the world in terms of primordial evil and dark magic, it just seemed silly to not have Doctor Strange aware of it, because he's the Sorcerer Supreme, right? Like, he is the person that is supposed to be aware of all of this stuff all of the time. So that seemed very organic. Uh, and I've got a couple other characters from the Marvel universe that Blade's going to encounter, but also it seems very organic, right? So for me, it's really about the story of the consequence, what's plausible, and what would really happen. Like, if you have a story about the proliferation of technology or something, and you're in the era of Tony Stark, and he's not a character in that story, well, he would probably be aware, right? There'd be certain things, so yeah, it really just sort of comes out of that. And Marvel gave me no resistance on it, again, to their credit, I think, because they understood why I was doing it. It wasn't simply just, let's cram this character in there, let's cram this character in there, it was more like, well, this makes sense because the Sorcerer Supreme would check in on this affair and interact with Blade, and they've interacted before, so it just felt right.
Yeah, and you mentioned like you could probably tell, you could smell it out if like a screenwriter is wanting to push the comic in a certain direction. What's it kind of like being able to switch back and forth from writing TV shows, movies, and comics, like switching between all three of those, that's got to be like a different mindset for each one of those.
Well, the biggest difference is that the comic book work that I do always comes out, right? When you're writing screenplays, you might get paid handsomely to write a screenplay, but the likelihood of that screenplay turning into a movie is, if I'm going to give a number to it, maybe 25%, right? Because so many other things have to align. It's not just that the script has to be done and of a certain quality. You have to find a director that the studio believes in, to trust with this budget. Then they have to find actors, to play these characters in this thing. And that turns into a scheduling thing, and then another thing, and then the director gets another job, and then they want to go off and do that now. And so now the script has no director, and you can't find this, you can't find that. It's really, really difficult, challenging to get a movie off of the ground or a television show off of the ground, right? I mean, you can be a Hollywood screenwriter and have a very, very comfortable lifestyle and never have anything produced because the planet's never aligned for you in that way. In comics, if you're hired to write a thing, it's going to come out, right? They don't really sit on comic book scripts that often. I mean, it can happen, but it happens very, very, very rarely. So even though I make astronomically, exponentially more as a screenwriter or a television writer, or even the DGA minimum as a director is astronomically more than I would make writing a comic book, I like the fact that I write something and I know people are going to enjoy it, that people are going to be able to engage with it because it's going to be out there for people to have, right? So that's what the biggest difference is for me. And that's why I keep coming back to the medium when I have the time to do something, because ultimately I like telling stories so that people can experience them. And the short amount of time from conception to people reacting to it, I really enjoy that. And so that's why I stay kind of in the periphery of comics, and jump in, when my schedule allows me to.
That's dope. Yeah, I've heard a couple people that kind of make that switch talk about that sort of, that ability to engage. Because as a screenwriter, you work on so many things that could be very personal to you, and sometimes they may never see the light of day. You may show some people that are in your inner circle, but you write these things so that people can experience them. And in comics, you have that ability. Even in the case of Blade, in this, you're able to make the biggest budget Blade that's ever been made because you're able to write these things into comics. So,
Well, yeah, and it also makes me a better storyteller, because when you write a screenplay, even if they make your screenplay, the most people that are going to read that screenplay, and this is being very, very liberal, assuming that the crew is going to take a look at it, which they often don't. We're in the hundreds, the low hundreds, maybe, even on a big movie like that, right? You write a comic book, you're in the thousands if you're working for Marvel or DC, right? Maybe you're in the 7,000, 9,000, 10,000 range in a low selling Marvel book, or you might even be in, your or big two book. But if you're like a Scott Snyder or Tom King or someone like that, you're in the hundreds of thousands, of people that are experiencing your work, right? So you're getting a lot of feedback via social media. People will respond and engage and talk to me about what they liked, and they'll often talk to you about what they don't like, and all those things. But you'll get a sense of how your stories are landing. Like what works about your approach, what isn't working so much, what worked in a way that you didn't intend it to work, so you can learn from that and maybe put more intention around that. Now you know that, if I push in this direction, I get this out of that. Sometimes something you're just sure is going to be gangbusters just hits flat, and it doesn't really work for people, but you can get some data on that and then recalibrate your approach. So it sculpts me, I think, into a better overall storyteller. And comics are a visual medium, and because I'm a visual thinker, it allows me to think in pictures, which is very similar to filmmaking in the most high position of the macrocosmic view of it, right? You're basically using pictures to tell a story. So it's filmmaking on paper, in a way. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what the experience is like.
I think that's like a super accurate analogy of what I was thinking when I was reading the first couple issues, because I think I was about halfway through the second issue, and I was like, man, this really feels like I'm getting a frame by frame shot of a movie. And it kept feeling more and more like a movie as I was reading. I was like, this is like one of the best kind of like Blade things I've seen outside of the movie that Wesley Snipes was in. And it kept reminding me of, man, this is a this like Wesley Snipes' Blade was like one of the first characters I saw in a movie that I was like, this is the definition of a badass. And I'm like probably like, I don't know, like 9 or 10 when I'm watching this. And I was like, yeah, this is if I'm gonna see anything else in a movie or anything else in a comic book, if I'm gonna think it's a badass, it's gotta be as badass as Wesley Snipes is in Blade right now. And that's kind of like what it was like for me reading the first 2 issues. And like what's it like being able to bring a character that a lot of people are like, yeah, this is like the definition of being a badass. What's it like bringing that character to life, like on the page and getting to write for him?
Well, it's so there's kind of two me's, right? There is Bryan, the adult, thoughtful writer who cares about the characterization and the thematics and wants emotional verisimilitude from everything else and all that. And then there's like the 12-year-old me who's just curled up on that big pillow as a kid, watching whatever he's watching and then pretending to be RoboCop when the movie is over, right? Just walking around my mother's apartment going like, "Drop it, dead or alive, you're coming with me," and all that stuff, right? So I like to keep both of those me's alive in the work. I was just talking to an actor, brilliant actor, on this little project I'm directing about how it's a balance. On one hand, you want things to have real emotional significance, to really be about something, to be challenging dramatically, and you're aiming for those very, very kind of penetrative explorations of the human condition. But on the other side of it, I want people to look cool and do badass things too, right? So it's like, you're talking to the actor. It's like, yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit about the motivation for the scene, but you're also going to look really cool in this leather jacket. So with Blade, it's the same thing, right? It's like part of me is like, well, I want to explore his relationship to his own monstrosity, and I want to explore the role of primordial evil in the world. I want to have these philosophical ideas, but I also want him to drive a car through a window and then come out and say something cool, right? And so you've got to keep that part of you alive. There's someone who's dear to me who taught me a lot of things, but one of the things they taught me was you have to play. You have to maintain the spirit of play, right? So I'm always balancing those two things. And with Blade, I'm like, well, Blade's a badass. Like that's the thing, right? Like, there are some characters that, you have like a Peter Parker who's got some imposter syndrome about this and about that. And that's the experience of Peter Parker, right? Peter Parker is kind of us with powers. Blade is not us with powers. Blade is just a badass dude who just does badass stuff, right? He's kind of in like that Ghost Rider category where, you just want to see badassery out of this character. And that's cathartic for us, right? So yeah, just kind of keep all that stuff in mind and never forget what it felt like to either read a book when I was a kid or watch a movie when I was a kid or even listen to some badass music when I was a kid. That feeling that you get that makes you feel like you can be a little more badass. And then, of course, you try to do something and you realize you can't. But there's that feeling that you get at the beginning of it where it's like, yeah, so yeah, I always want to kind of put that in and make sure that's there and never forget the joy of this stuff when I'm working on it.
Yeah, and sort of talking about that as the series progresses, like what would you like readers to take away, and what can you tease for what's to come with Blade?
Well, the story is really about Blade's relationship to his monstrosity, his relationship to evil, and also the role of evil in our world, right? Does it serve a purpose? Does it not serve a purpose? Have we become so secular in our thinking that we have forgotten the idea of just sentient evil in a pure distilled form, right? So I'll be continuing to engage in those ideas because to me, that's Blade's core struggle. Like every character has one arrow pulling them one direction, one arrow pulling them in another direction. I mean, that Andrew Kevin Walker, the screenwriter of Seven, he said that. And for Blade, it's this one pole is towards heroism, making the world a better place, a safer place, protecting the innocent, those things. But another pole is towards primality, monstrosity. There's a predatory aspect to what he is because of how he was born and all of that stuff. So he's always pulled between those two forces. So I'll be engaging that. And then what readers can expect, I think they can expect, more big action. They can expect new characters and also familiar characters. And they can expect this Blade series to, in a weird analogous way, I sort of look at it almost like a Bond thing in a way. Bond was a big influence on this, just in the sense of, I've got to solve this problem. I've got to go to these foreign locales. I'm going to meet these characters who I might be able to trust, or I could have trusted once, but I don't know if I can trust them now. And I've got to stop this bad guy from doing this terrible thing. And most of the world will be unaware of the fact that I'm doing it, right? So those are the kind of things I think readers can expect to enjoy, and beautiful artwork. I mean, we've got Laura West, who's done most of the series, has done incredible work, and like telepathically understands when I want a certain kind of image. It's wonderful. I'm never disappointed with the art that comes back to me. So yeah, I just think, like, in these times, with the world being as difficult as it's been, and we've had not just the current global moment we're in right now, but we've had some difficult years, guys. It's been like a tough 3-4 years in a lot of ways. And right now, when it comes to comics, certainly, I just want to be a dependable name on a shelf that if you see Bryan Hill's name on a book, you're going to get taken on a ride. You're going to have just a smart, elevated, but still escapist experience. So that 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you read that comic book, you can go to a different place where maybe the evil is more clear to see and in a lot of ways easier to defeat.
Yeah, exactly. Part of what makes the medium so special is that you could escape and sort of take it a little bit away, and some things at times could be a little bit more black and white. And as you said, we kind of live in a crazy time, and we really need those things. But you really are that dependable name on the shelf. Like, Blade has been such a fun series, and something that, like I said, if you're a fan of Blade, and you've missed what especially those first two movies brought and sort of changed the game and sort of set the stage for what we have in terms of like pop culture movies and stuff like that, the series is definitely something you want to check out. So thank you, Bryan, for coming on and taking the time out of your day. It was great to talk to you, especially after reading the series. It's been awesome to go through your process and understand how you sort of navigate being a director, a producer, a screenwriter, comic book writer. I'm always fascinated by people who are able to switch that way, just because I could focus only at one thing at a time. So kudos to you and the work you've been doing.
Well, I can't just focus on one thing at a time as much as I would love to, right? I think to me, that's the most rarefied air. I think about someone like Christopher Nolan or David Fincher, who has the ability to focus on one thing, for months at a time. That seems like nirvana to me. I'm always managing multiple fires at the same time. But I just want to say to people that are listening to this, if you've read Blade, or you've read my other work, or you've watched Titans, and you've just been kind of supportive of what I'm doing, and literally by experiencing what I'm creating, you are being supportive. Just want to say genuinely thank you. I'm always grateful and humbled by the fact that people will spend their time and money on something that came out of my head. I don't take any of that for granted ever. And hopefully, you'll see a lot more Blade to come, and you'll see more comic book work coming out of me. I've got a couple other things I'm building that will get announced soon. So while I don't think I'll ever be able to, scheduling wise, be at the center of comic book culture, I'll always be a participant in one way or another.
That's awesome. Is it anything? Is it a Marvel? Is it a DC? Is it a creator-owned project? Is it something you could tease out?
kind of a lot of, things.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Doing like a little bit of thing over here, then like doing like a little bit of fazooch over here, then then a little spicoli, then get in there with the garlic, and then Bob's your uncle.
That's awesome. Again, thank you, Bryan, and we really appreciate you coming on. All right, guys, with that, Badaboom.
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 Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Badaboom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.